Namaskar and a very good afternoon to everyone. May I request everyone to please put the mobile on silence mode. A very hearty welcome to the 18th lecture of Visva-Bharati lecture series on Poland, European Union, India and the relevance of the heritage of Rabindranath Tagore for the contemporary world by His Excellency Mr. Adam Burakowski, Ambassador of Poland to India. We are extremely grateful to His Excellency Ambassador Adam Burakowski, who joined as Ambassador to India in December 2017 and was very keen on strengthening academic and cultural cooperation between Visva-Bharati and Polish universities. We requested him to deliver a lecture, and he has very kindly agreed to address our students, faculty, and employees on an important topic that is of much concern and of mutual interest. We are delighted to have Professor Burakowski with us for the Visva-Bharati lecture series. We also welcome Ms. Eva Stenkiewicz, Third Secretary Embassy of Poland, and Mr. Joydeep Roy, Honorary Consulate of Poland in Kolkata. It is not the first time that the Polish ambassador is visiting Visva-Bharati. In 2012, also we had the pleasure of hosting a lecture by the then ambassador of Poland to India. In recent past, we also have been having exchanges of students and scholars, especially interested in humanities, social sciences, music and fine arts, and surely we would like to have more and more exchanges. I will not take much time to speak in detail about the lecture series, but I will only remind the prime objective of starting the lecture series, that is to have a platform for dialogue with distinguished scholars, researchers, and the best minds of the country and abroad in any field, to have a platform where we can have free exchanges of ideas and where we can question each other with respect and dignity, enter into a dialogue to understand each other's views, a step in tune with the true spirit of Visva-Bharati that was envisaged by our founder, Rabindranath Tagore. Today, we have gathered to have exchanges on the issues relating to Poland, European Union, India, and the relevance of heritage of Rabindranath Tagore for the contemporary world. Today, India's relationship with the world is one of the most significant themes across the globe, and more so for India, as we need to improve our relationship simply because we are the greatest democracies of the world with a rich culture, political, social, and academic and moral traditions. It is here in Shantiniketan, Rabindranath Tagore gave a lead to the human relationship in early 20s. Visva-Bharati, the first center of languages and culture, was established. It is with this legacy of academic exchanges and ideas that we can still claim to have a better understanding and cooperation between various countries. As a leading academic institution, it is an imperative for us to address and discuss the relevance of the heritage of Rabindranath Tagore for the contemporary world. Today, we are fortunate to listen to the Ambassador, Adam Burakowski. I extend a very hearty welcome once again to all of you and request Professor Romit Roy from the Center of Modern European Languages, Bhasha Bhavan, to introduce the speaker, and Professor Vidut Chakravarti, Vice Chancellor Visva-Bharati, to kindly preside over the lecture. Dr. Romit Roy, please. Thank you.
Namaskar and good afternoon, Your Excellency, Professor Adam Burakowski, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Vidut Chakravarti, esteemed Registrar, Professor Asha Mukherjee, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my privilege and pleasure to introduce to you today's esteemed speaker, His Excellency Professor Adam Burakowski, the Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the Republic of Poland to India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Afghanistan. Professor Burakowski got his PhD and BSc in Political Science and is Professor of the Institute of Political Sciences at the Polish Academy of Sciences. He graduated from the Maharaja Jam Sahib Digvijay Singh Ji High School in Warsaw and the University of Warsaw, where he got his MA in History and Eastern Studies. I'm sure there is a very interesting history behind this high school named after an Indian Maharaja, and perhaps we'll have the opportunity to hear more from Your Excellency about this interesting personality. In 2006-2017, Professor Burakowski worked in Polskie Radio, Polish national radio broadcaster, and he held there various positions related to the international affairs. He was a Polish representative to the European Broadcasting Union, or EBU, and there he was the coordinator of the Central Eastern European Group. At the same time, he was involved in the Euronet, which is a pan-European radio project. And this is financed by the European Commission, established in 2007. Professor Burakowski was involved in various projects on the Cold War. For example, at the Cold War International History Project of the Wilson Center of Scholars in Washington. And he contributed many publications in this regard. During his professional career, he cooperated with many academic institutions in India, for example, the Center for European Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University, and in Romania, and also in the Czech Republic. He has authored many books, particularly concerning India and the Central Europe, and his specialty is Romania. Professor Burakowski speaks many languages. Among them are English, Hindi, Romanian, and Russian. His interests involve culture and contemporary affairs of South Asia and Central Europe. Today he will be speaking on Poland, the European Union, India, and the relevance of the heritage of Rabindranath Tagore for the contemporary world. As we all know, Rabindranath Tagore has a very special place in the relationship between India and Poland. We know, for example, that the Polish doctor, Dr. Janusz Korczak, and his orphan children produced or put on stage Rabindranath's play, The Post Office Tagore, in the Polish ghetto during the 1940s. And today's lecture also assumes special significance in the light of the commemoration that was held yesterday regarding the 75th year of liberation of Auschwitz. So I would like to welcome His Excellency Professor Adam Burakowski to begin his speech. Thank you.
पहले तो आप हिंदी जानते हो ना, इसलिए मैं तो खुशी व्यक्त करना चाहता हूँ। विश्व भारती का जो परिवार है यहाँ पे आपके सामने बैठे हुए, हम लोग सब आभारी हैं आपके।
ओके, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। और मुझे बहुत बुरा लगता है कि और अफसोस की बात है कि मुझे बंगाली भाषा नहीं आती।
But I will request you to come back to Visva-Bharati and visit us more often, so that you will learn Bengali in course of time. But one thing I would like to mention, just we had a brief discussion before we sat on the podium, and I came to know that he is a fellow colleague of mine, because we are all, both of us, students of political science. So I will not address him as His Excellency, because he is just my colleague. So I will call him Professor Burakowski, and if possible, Adam.
Yes, yes, of course.
So I am very happy to welcome you, Adam. And I just came to know that his last essay, which was published in Asian Survey, which is one of the most prestigious journals in the world of social sciences, on Aam Aadmi Party. So, and since I come from Delhi, so I was inquiring, and I am happy to know that the Aam Aadmi Party has an edge over the contending parties BJP and the Congress, according to Adam's research. But today we will not talk about Aam Aadmi Party. If I knew about it, probably I would have asked you to talk about Aam Aadmi Party. But I mean, it was already pre-decided. So he will enlighten us on basically Indo-European relationship with reference to Tagore, right? And we are very happy and fortunate to have you in our midst. So I think the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. Whenever you'd like to sit.
Maybe I start from here. Distinguished professors, ladies and gentlemen, let me start with a moment of silence, because yesterday we commemorated the 76th anniversary of the liberation of the German Nazi concentration camp Auschwitz-Birkenau, and this is the International Holocaust Day. So let's have a moment of silence to commemorate the victims of Holocaust and Second World War.
1 minute.
Moment. All right. Thank you. So, beginning my speech, I would like to thank you for inviting me here, and especially to Mr. Vice Chancellor of, if you allow me, Vidiut, and also to Honorary Consulate of Poland in Kolkata, which organized this this lecture. I mean, my coming here. This has always been my dream to come here, and why I will tell you later. I can tell you my bio was already presented by honorable professor, so I cannot add much thus. Maybe I will elaborate a little bit what is Maharaja Jamshed Vijay Singh Ji High School in Warsaw, which I graduated. So during the Second World War, Germany attacked Poland from western side and Soviet Union from eastern side. And they deported around a few hundreds of thousands of people to Siberia, to gulags. And then Germany attacked Soviet Union, the alliances changed, and Stalin let those people go. So they went to Iran, and from Iran they came to many places, including India. And the Polish refugees were placed in two places in India. The biggest camp was in Kolhapur, Maharashtra. It was mainly for adults. 5,000 adults were there. And the second one, smaller, was in Navanagar, in Gujarat. It was for children. Around 1,000 Polish children were spent the whole Second World War there due to honesty of local Maharaja, the Maharaja Jamshed Vijay Singh Ji. And he just wanted one thing from the state of Poland for his deeds, that one street in Warsaw should be named after him. And first we named the high school after him. And I graduated this high school. Then the street came later. I mean, it's not a street but the roundabout. So my whole journey of life is connected to India. And actually, Rabindranath Tagore was my first contact with India, because one of my friends in high school was very fascinated by him, and she borrowed me some books with short stories of Rabindranath Tagore. So the magic of this and beauty of this literature inspired me to study more about it. I learned about Shantiniketan, and from my late childhood I dreamed to come here. This dream came true because of you. So thank you very much. So my journey with India started with Rabindranath Tagore. Then in 1997 I came to India for the first time. I researched India for 20 years, and then I became the ambassador. So I spent with India more than half of my life. But starting the lecture, I can tell you that I prefer discussion than the lecture, and I know that Shantiniketan is more about discussion, which I like. So I will just say a few words about these topics, and I will really encourage you to ask any questions, because there's a spirit of academic life to discuss. And if we don't agree, it's not a problem, because this is the freedom of thought, which for me is the most precious value. Freedom, and especially freedom of thought. So let me start with European Union. The first thing that I mentioned was the atrocities of the Second World War and Holocaust. Out of this came the big idea to have a permanent peace in Europe. This idea already vehiculated in some circles in Europe before even the First World War, and more strongly after the First World War. And the influence of Rabindranath Tagore in this context I will see in one of the most important books written in the interwar period, which was the book of, in my opinion, the best German writer, Hermann Hesse. If my German colleague agree, he's the best, or maybe one of the best. Hesse wrote a book called Siddhartha, which was highly influenced, in my opinion, by Rabindranath Tagore and all the thinking of what India has in its best. I mean, the peace and coexistence of people of different religions, different nations, and also the inner peace that the Indian tradition brings. So I think this book really influenced the way of thinking of the European elites and societies in the interwar period and also after that. Also, the universal message of Rabindranath Tagore was echoed by some universal message of other European thinkers, and this mixture of ideas and the especially bloody experience of the Second World War and the Holocaust, it was the basis of the European Union. So, European Union was first created as a common market union or society between a few states, but from the very beginning the ideas were more broad, and the community of free trade in the thought of the fathers of the European Union was only the nucleus of the more resistant, more permanent solution for the peace in Europe. Unfortunately, just after the war, the half of Europe was conquered by another totalitarian regime, the Soviet Union, including, unfortunately, my state. It was conquered by Soviets, and at that time, this area of peace was only possible in the western part of our continent. But the idea prevailed, and after the fall of the communism, the European Union spread also to our part of the world, and our countries joined from 2004, then the second wave was in 2007, and in 2015, if I'm not mistaken, or 14, Croatia as the last country joined the European Union. The European Union is based on democracy, freedom of thought, freedom of movement, and this is the thing that is common between Europe and India. And as Mr. Professor already said, that the cooperation between India and Europe is very natural. You are the biggest democracy, and we as a European Union are also one of the biggest democracies. So these things bind us together, and I think that the thought of Rabindranath Tagore really contributed to this on both sides, because he is well known also in our countries, in Poland included. In Poland, the let's say repetition of Rabindranath Tagore's thinking was not only in the translations. All of his works are translated into Polish, both from English version and from Bengali version. So there are many translations of his most important works, and from the rest there are only one translation, right? Either from English, either from Bengali, and this is the basics that when anyone thinks about India is the Tagore. We also have a street named after Rabindranath Tagore in Warsaw. Actually, yesterday I spoke with one Bengali living in Poland, and he told me that the Indians living in Warsaw have an idea to inform the inhabitants of that street who was Tagore, because many people don't know. They are just saying that it's a name, but who really he was and what was his message. So, I mean, Tagore is the first introduction, or one of the first introductions to India, both in Poland and in other countries of European Union. So, we in the European Union are the community of democracies, and we would like to spread the message of democracy and freedom to other parts of the world, and India is our natural partner. And what is the case of Poland? The history of Poland is somehow similar to the history of Bengal. I mean, we also suffered some conquests, some massacres done by the other countries to our nation, and especially during the Second World War, we suffered as much as Bengal, with the famine, with this attempt to attack from Japan, and then the atrocities of the partition. We suffered also in the sense that during the war, 6 million of Polish citizens were killed in a planned way. Out of them, 3 million were Jews. Poland, before the Second World War, was the biggest hub of European Jews, in the country with the biggest Jewish population in Europe. So, and we also changed the borders. The eastern part of Poland was taken by the Soviet Union, and we have been given the eastern part of then Germany. And the people from eastern part of Poland were moved to that part. And Bengal also changed the borders during the partition. There is one detail that both borders were, at least to some extent, invented by the same person, Lord Curzon, because he was the first one to divide Bengal, and he also proposed some border which is called Curzon Line, which is now the current border between Poland and Ukraine. He proposed this just after the First World War, but it was not accepted, and Stalin wanted this border to be in operation after the Second World War. So the connections between Poland and Bengal are, I mean, the historical similarities are sometimes surprisingly close. So, what is nowadays Poland? After the fall of the communists, we made every effort to join the European Union, and at that time there was no union but European communities, and we wanted to join the Western structures. First NATO and then European Union. We are the 6th the biggest country of the European Union. I think this year will be the 5th biggest, because unfortunately UK is leaving. And we contribute to this common market and common share of ideas. We participate in European institutions on the full membership rights, and we like it very much. Actually, Poland is one of the most pro-European country in Europe, in the EU, in terms of the will of the population. The survey polls, they show that the acceptance of being in the European Union is more than 80%. This is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, in the whole European Union. Being there, we also maintain and try to expand our relationship with India. They have always been very good, and diplomatic relations were established in 1954, but before that, in 1933, Poland established a consulate in Bombay, in then British India. And the consulate in Bombay played a crucial role in the story that I told you at the beginning of my speech, so these Polish refugees. But the next establishment of diplomatic relations came in 1954, and Poland, as a country of the Soviet bloc, which was at that time very close to India, was also close to India in both economic and political sense. Our economic cooperation was very developed during the 1970s, 1980s, and one aspect of this remained from that time. It is our biggest trade with India is actually with West Bengal. I mean, this is the trade of coal industry. We are selling the coking coal to India, and the coal of India is based in Kolkata. So our ties are biggest with this part of India, and also West Bengal has signed the MOU with one of the regions of Poland, Silesia, and this mutual exchange is growing. I hope that sometimes at some time also we see more Polish students here at the university and more Shantiniketan students in Poland. This is another of my dreams. Also, we have some Polish companies which are invested here, especially in the south, in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. India is the biggest receiver of Polish FDI in the whole Asia, so it's a good basis for the further cooperation. Last year we opened a direct flight from Warsaw to Delhi. We tried to expand these connections because in the last few years we observed a totally new phenomenon in mutual relations. It's the growing number of Indians in Poland. According to official figures from 2018, because from 2019 we still don't have, there are 10,000 Indians in Poland, and out of them 4,000 are students. So this students exchange is also going on. Our main universities have courses in English, which are accessible to Indian students, and as far as I know, the opinions about the study in Poland are good. In last month, we opened research unit that is not connected to India but to Bengal. I'm in the Center of Study of Bangladesh. We opened this in the Jagiellonian University in Krakow. So all these dimensions of contacts, I mean, economic, cultural, people to people, they are already there, and what we can do is to expand them and to have more mutual understanding, more cultural exchange, more people to people exchange, more economical exchange, and also to cooperate between the democracies and between the countries that promote freedom, democracy, and stability. So maybe this will be the end of my introduction. I just wanted to thank you, Idjus, for this very nice this picture that I just got. It will be on a very significant place in my room, and I like it very much. I also like the Rabindranath Sangit that I just listened to. I love Rabindranath Sangit, and I listen to it when I work. I have like a few thousands of Rabindranath Sangit pieces in different vocalists. So, and I started to learn Bengali, but I still I cannot say anything, but I can read almost. Thank you, and let me return to my place, and I'm ready for any questions that you ask me. I'm open, and there are no bad questions, there are only bad answers.
Thank you, Adam, for a very interesting, provocative kind of discussion. Let me begin by complimenting you that you are probably one of the few of my friends. When I say my, I think of the entire family, our friends, who is keen to learn Rabindranath. And I think we have got a group of students. If you are interested, I would like you to come down to Shantiniketan at least once. Manush, কদিন লাগবে আসতে? সপ্তাহে দুদিন হলে হবে? Now here he is a professor. So professor said that if you come down at least twice a week, then we learn good Rabindranath. Agree?
Yes.
So we'll have him twice a week. Anyway, that's besides the point, but as Adam said, he is open to questions. But my request to you that please do not begin a counter paper. Normally we tend to do that. And we are all teachers, just like Adam. So I would request all my colleagues to have pointed question, if you have. That's it.
Thank you, Professor Burakowski. Now, I'm a student of popular culture, and because Poland doesn't play cricket and we are not very good at football, so we leave sports out and we move directly into what basically to my generation, and when I say my, I speak for many of us in this room. I can see Dipankar, I can see Ronita, Anona is right beside me, is that we have been terribly influenced, and I use the word terribly on its loaded text, by the films of Andrzej Wajda, also Roman Polanski, but Andrzej Wajda specifically the war trilogy, A Generation, Kanal, Ashes and Diamond, and Katyn. Now, when we were in school, when we were growing up, we were told that the Katyn massacre of the Polish officers were done by the Nazi Germany. Later on it is revealed, and it's very much part of Andrzej Wajda's position in the movie, that it's been done by the NKVD, by the Russians. Now that, in a way, reverses the way we were allowed to look at, the German occupation of Poland. The Russian atrocities in Poland came to us a bit late, delayed, delayed response. That's question number one. Second question is that to what extent did Indian films influence the Polish youth in the 1960s and the 70s? Because we also produced quite a number of filmmakers who also dealt with Rabindranath Tagore's works, and they have been received worldwide. So how did Polish youth in the 80s and the 90s respond to Indian films? Thank you.
No, I can respond. So first about cutting. Cutting has been done by the Soviet Union on the personal order by Stalin, by Joseph Stalin. But these graves were discovered by the German army when they advanced into the Soviet Union. And Germany, they created some commission to exhumate this and published all possible material about this crime. Of course, to their own ends. I mean, they wanted to make the chaos in the anti-Nazi coalition. But they said the truth. I mean, these crimes were, this genocide was committed by the Soviet Union. But the Soviet Union never accepted this. Only Gorbachev, at his last years, he allowed some documents to be published, and then the Russian authorities, especially Boris Yeltsin, they really claimed that it was done by the Soviet Union. In this context, I would like to have some distinction between Russia and Soviet Union. I mean, the Soviet Union was bigger, and it was multinational, multi-ethnic. Current Russia is also kind of multi-ethnic, but the Soviet Union was consisted of some republics. So we always say Soviets in this context. So this massacre was also important because they killed 25,000 officers, but they were not regular officers. They were people from conscription. So they were members of the pre-war elite. They were like doctors, professors, some accountants, or people of high education, and so it was a very big tragedy for our nation. And Wajda has it right in his film. And about the mutual influence between Polish and Indian cinema, I can tell you that actually Andrzej Wajda made his first film in the same year that Satyajit Ray, in 1954. And as I said in my introduction, actually Poland and Tagore came to a very bloody period just before they started to make films. So their experience were to a much extent similar. And Satyajit Ray and his films were popular in Poland and much commented. As I said, also the works of Rabindranath Tagore were also known, and the way of thinking of Mahatma Gandhi was also popular even during the Second World War, but more popular it became in 1980s when the anti-communist movement called Solidarity emerged. I mean, this non-violence strategy of Mahatma Gandhi was used by the Solidarity.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. Ready for this very interesting discussion. I like to supplement our Vice Chancellor request to you that you can visit twice in a week. It may not be possible for you, so you can think about start an institution in collaboration with Visva-Bharati and your government, and academicians from this university and a student of this university can develop some translation work in Polish authors to India, and Rabindranath, Tagore and Gandhi translation.
So I can tell you, I can repeat what I already said in my introduction, that all the works of Rabindranath Tagore were translated into Polish. And some of them were translated twice, once from English, once from Bengali. So this has been done already, but other Bengali authors, why not? And I also agree that the Polish authors should be translated into Bengali and published here in India. Actually, last year, the Polish author won the Nobel Prize for Literature, Ms. Olga Tokarczuk.
Thank you very much for the brilliant talk you gave. My interest is to know, do your universities teach any Indian languages and also history and all that? How many of these universities are there where these Indian languages are taught, and also the students also learn these things very well?
So, Polish universities started teaching Sanskrit in 19th century, when Poland was occupied by three different regimes, three different countries. But the universities were to some extent Polish, and they already started teaching Sanskrit. And the Polish School of Sanskritology has not only a long tradition, but big achievements as well. Actually, there is one Polish citizen who lives in Ahmedabad in Gujarat, and he speaks perfect Sanskrit. Perfect Sanskrit. He lives there for 20 years, and he speaks Sanskrit as it was his mother language. But in various cities, we have the faculties of Indology or of modern languages, and they are teaching Hindi, Bengali, Sanskrit as well, Punjabi, and Tamil. If I'm not mistaken, there might be some more. So the main centers are in Warsaw, Krakow, Wrocław, and in Poznań. And there is also in the University of Wrocław also teaches the traditional ancient yoga as a subject. So it is mainly because India has a very active honorary consul in Wrocław, Mr. Kartikeya Johi. And speaking about Wrocław, I can tell you that Mr. Amitabh Bachchan was in Wrocław last month.
I think I am loud enough without a mic. I had the privilege to visit Poland for 2 months. I have been to University of Łódź. I don't know whether I pronounce it correctly. And I worked there for 2 months. That was 1992. So it was immediately after the change from communist regime to this the democratic regime. My first question is that from the political science angle, how do you distinguish Indian democracy and social democracy in Europe as a whole? First question. And second is that even though it was some time after the change to democracy, the infrastructure that I found in the University of Łódź, especially in the laboratory where I was working, was excellent. I mean, much ahead of what we find in most of the Indian universities. So it will be, I could sense that Poland is striving first and competing with the other European universities, particularly in the Western world, Germany, Great Britain, something like that. They are striving very fast. So what will be the modus operandi if we could really find some space for our science students in Polish universities, so that they can have a real feeling of how the Western world is progressing and can enrich themselves. So these 2 points.
Can I add something?
Yes.
I also happen to have some experiences of visiting Polish universities in last almost 1 decade, say from 2010 onwards. And I can't pronounce the names, Breslau and Krakow and Warsaw. And actually I have seen this change, as Professor was talking about, the economic change. It is a drastic change in the economy of the country. And this democratic part is, of course, one aspect of it, but on the other hand, the economic changes which Poland is going through, and for good, are really exciting. And a lot of opening. For example, in 2010, I've seen that most of the students, they were going to European other countries, for example, England, France, etc., for studies. Now, people are not thinking of going out. Rather, they prefer to have their own resources, their own set of universities where they can work. And this change, for example, is a drastic change. In 1 decade, one can see the professors were very lowly paid earlier, but now they are very well paid. So the universities, for example, the student fee is also extremely sort of reasonable in that sense, and that's perhaps one of the reasons that Indian students, they sort of prefer to go to Poland. In the last 1 decade, a lot of people actually went as a student. Actually, last year I had the experience of applying for visa, and I heard that almost 5,000 applications they receive every day for Poland. And this is something, which is really remarkable. Poland seems to be the travel destination for most of the Indians, one of the most favorite, because it's reasonable in some sense, in the sense that it's not very expensive, yet, they get best of the European, sort of whatever as a tourist they get. So this is one question. The other is regarding we had all sorts of exchanges in philosophy, in religion, languages, especially this friend of mine, she's working as a professor at Krakow, and like gender studies, etc. There's a lot of sort of interest coming into the Indian languages, especially from 1970s onwards. For example, even Bengali, interest in Bengali, that grew from 1970s onwards. Learning Bengali language and translating from Bengali directly to Polish. This has happened only after 70s. Before that, it was not there. Now, this learning Bengali, sitting in Poland, and some of them are, of course, coming to India, maybe online courses, etc. So, Bengali culture has been really opened up for Polish people. And therefore, I have friends who speak perfect Bengali, Now, they are working on Tagore, for example, Tagore's literature, they are translating, they are writing. Now, this is a very recent phenomenon. Now, could you explain what could be the reason? Why? Of course, you did explain to a certain extent, but from 17 onwards, before 70 also you talked about the relationship and maybe the similarities you have talked about. But can that be sufficient reason to sort of explain this recent phenomena of learning Bengali and sort of sharing the Bengali culture? Or is there something deeper than that in the sense of sharing the culture and sort of psyche and philosophy and maybe more? Thank you.
Actually, to this one, there is a political explanation, but I will come back to this. So, the difference between Indian democracy and the European is a very vast topic. But what can I say is that in Europe, all the countries except for Belgium, Switzerland, they are more or less monoethnical. And I would compare the the parliaments in the countries to Vidyan Sabha and the European Parliament to Lok Sabha. I mean, in a term that we have the European elections to the European Parliament in states. We vote for the candidates from our states, and they meet together in the European Parliament. So India is of course bigger in terms of inhabitants than the European Union, but is also very rich of many cultures and many political traditions, like Europe. But to compare India, the whole of India, with any particular state in Europe, I see only these two. I mean, Switzerland and Belgium. But Belgium are only two nations living in one state. So this is the first and most visible reason, the difference. And the other differences, of course, are many. You know, our continent has so many different parties and political ideas, but at the end of the day, we can group them in some political groups, which happens in the European Parliament. But there is, I mean, the European Parliament is not as powerful as Lok Sabha here, and even yesterday we had a very visible example here in India that the European Parliament commented the Indian politics in one way, and the European Commission, which is elected by the states, by the governments of the states, has a different opinion than the European Parliament. So I think it will be not so often here in India that the Lok Sabha as a whole might have another opinion than the government of it. So this is some difference that I can see. And speaking about the universities, yes, our universities they offer a good standard for very affordable money for students. So this is even this English language course much cheaper than in the western part of our continent. And maybe this is the key to the popularity, the growing popularity of studying in Poland among Indian students. The numbers are not as high that are 5,000 per day, but they are high. As I said, 4,000 students study in Poland, and the number will be growing. And why from 1970s the Bengali language became more important in Poland? The reason is purely political, because Bangladesh came to existence, and Poland was one of the first countries that recognized the independent Bangladesh. And so the studies on Bangladesh, and including the Bengali language, were given a new impulse to develop. So that is why. And why is Tagore and other Bengali authors are being translated? Because there's some work to be done. So in the decades, the next people were translated in other parts of his heritage, and we see the results.
Sir, I have two questions to you. One is,
population in Poland and unemployment problem. One thing. And two is main industry in Poland and how rural India can collaborate with your country.
Rural India.
Rural.
So the population of Poland is like Telangana, 38 million. If you imagine the state of Telangana, this is Poland. And the unemployment is the lowest in our history. Actually, our companies, they don't have people they don't have workforce. They are looking for workforce everywhere in the world. After the Russian aggression against Ukraine in 2013-14 and annexation of Crimea, by the way, Poland doesn't accept this annexation. Around 1 million or more than 1 million Ukrainians came to Poland, and they took some legal employment. But nowadays we see that they are going farther west to Germany, to other countries. So this is the issue that our employment rate is the lowest in the history. And your second question was about
Cooperation between
rural India. Yes, the food processing. I think the food processing is the thing that we have some knowledge that we can share with rural India, definitely, and experience of our farmers might be precious for Indian farmers. One of our biggest export food products are apples, and our apples are one of the best in the world, and our farmers know how to make it. So this is the experience that we can share.
Very good.
I would like to share a memory of my school days. You talked about coking coal. So I come from collieries. And when we were young, we had friends from Poland because their parents, the father or the mother, they came as mining engineers. And we were in Bihar that time. My father was a mining engineer too. And there was exchange of engineers to make better quality of coking coal.
Yes.
So in the early 70s and late 60s, they were there, and Dhanushka Bruska was one of my friends. I still remember her name. And she was very much exposed to Rabindranath Sangeet and dances because we were accustomed with all those types of cultural programs in the schools, and she used to take part in all those programs with us. So the exchange between scholars and also mining engineers, I think it was for a long back history that has a relationship with India and
Thank you for sharing this experience. This is exactly what I said, that this cooperation on coal mining is very long. And in Bihar, it was the part that is now in Jharkhand.
Yes,
Thank you for that talk. I have two questions, and there might be a connection between them. I grew up in what was left front-ruled Bengal, so the left front ruled for more than 3 decades. And I also grew up with the notion of an entity culturally and politically called Eastern Europe. So I wanted to ask what, if at all, Eastern Europe or East Europe as an entity has any relevance anymore, given that it's part of the European Union. And secondly, what is contemporary Poland's relationship with its communist past? Is it one of unqualified rejection? Because we also grew up listening to or hearing or seeing on TV Lech Walesa and the whole unfolding and dismantling of the communist bloc. So what is your relationship with your communist past? Thank you.
So, I spent 20 years of my life researching these two topics as well. So, what is Eastern Europe? We in Poland call our part of Europe the Central Europe, which is the so-called Visva-Bharati group. This is Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia and Hungary. And we cooperate among these four very closely. So this is Central Europe, but we also include Central Europe, also the Baltic states, this Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, and also the southern part of this. So Slovenia, Croatia, Bulgaria, Romania, Serbia, Montenegro, Northern Macedonia, Albania. This is the area that we call Central Europe, or there is another like the region between three seas: the Baltic Sea, the Adriatic Sea, and the Black Sea. And we call the Eastern Europe the countries Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova. Moldova might be a central or eastern, and the European part of Russia. So this is the Polish perspective on this. But there are also other concepts. I see that my German colleague is looking at me, so the concept of Mitteleuropa is a German concept. And this includes also Austria and Germany. So there are many concepts of this. So I told you what is the Polish perception of this, and we prefer to call it Central or Central Eastern Europe. And this part of the world is not all the countries are in European Union. Yes, so Serbia, Montenegro, Northern Macedonia, Albania, they are not, in Moldova they are not in the European Union, although we want them to join at some other time. But there are many common traces among these countries, these nations. Actually, another very famous figure that spent the most significant part of her life in Bengal, Mother Teresa. She is from Albania and from Northern Macedonia. She was born in Skopje. So, her experience of motherland is somehow similar to what we had in Poland. So this is the first question, and second is also connected because all the countries that I mentioned suffered the communist rule. There were some differences, like Yugoslavia had the indigenous communism brought by Josip Broz Tito. And in the other countries, the communism was forcibly enforced by the Soviet Union. And the communism, the perception of communism in all these countries, except for the post-Yugoslavia and to some extent Albania, is that it had two dimensions. First, of communism as a system, and second, hostile occupation by the superpower. So, but I think that, in my personal opinion, the communist system was worse than the occupation. Because part of Poland was occupied by Tsarist Russia for more than 100 years. It was very bad period, and the Russians killed hundreds of thousands of Poles. But the economical system was more real. the communism was totally unreal system and led to collapse of the economy in all these countries. And the heritage of communism was also that it imposed some mentality to the people that they are dependent on state, and to look for the state as some entity that could solve all their problems, which is not. Yes.
Thank you. I was wondering about Tagore's contribution to Polish life in the sense that then and now there must have been some change in the Poles' approach to Tagore, that is one. And the other is which aspect? Is it peace? Is it a message of peace? Is it the society that he had portrayed? Is it the idea of cooperation? Which kind of an idea had the greatest appeal to the Poles? That is, these are the two questions.
So, I don't think that the perception of Tagore has changed. It has always been very positive, and Tagore influenced many Polish thinkers, writers, artists. Because the message of Tagore to some extent resembles the four virtues concepted by Plato. I mean the goodness, justice, beauty, and truth. Yeah, this is the four virtues concepted by Plato. So it was already there in the European thinking. And Tagore is being perceived as the very vocal supporter of all these four virtues. And one of the most elegant and beautiful voices from the whole age. So this is all, I mean, this is the main artistic perception of Tagore, but the political is more universal. I already mentioned, which is not Polish author but German, Hermann Hesse. He was highly influenced by him, and this influence came to Polish thinking also from other countries, so like from Germany.
Thank you very much for this fascinating talk. I just had a question regarding one of the ideals vehicled by Tagore's vision, that of universality in the sense of the free sharing of culture, knowledge, of ideas, which in a sense transcends the narrow borders of nation states. I think that is very much one of the founding principles also in creating this institution, Visva-Bharati. And so nowadays we see in Europe, also in other parts of the world, including in India and the US, very much the opposite of that vision, in the sense of the hardening of boundaries along nationalistic or communal lines. And I was wondering if you might like to say something about how Tagore's ideal might perhaps be revived in order to help people in various parts of the world to find this spirit of sharing that transcends such narrow boundaries.
Okay. So, thank you for this question. I think trends that you mentioned are a reaction to two facts. First is that the actual elites of the Western world somehow lost their credibility to many people, which is very well observed in the media especially, that all things are questioned. I mean, the things that were very obvious decade ago are not obvious right now for many inhabitants of the democratic countries. Also, and this is especially a European experience, that the generation that suffered the Second World War atrocities are dying out, and new generation comes that they did not go to any war. So they might think that the war is something good, fantastic, and very adventurous, which is of course not. But the second reason for this, I think, is the emergence of new threats, like the international terrorism. And people are scared about the international terrorism. And the very recent thing is this new virus that came from China, coronavirus. People are totally scared. They will give the parts of the freedom just to be more secure, which is understandable in such a threat. And they will support the politicians who promise them to be more secure. And if this promise is just electoral fake, which is in many cases, this is the second question. Yeah? But they are just electing the people who are promising them the security of life. And what could the message of Tagore be in this context? I think this is the message to see another human being as the same human being as ourselves. I mean, this to see them man in a man. Thank you.
Actually, my question now becomes redundant because of the previous question. What I wanted really to ask is, what is the relation between, like, Poland as a nation, the sovereignty and everything else, with the European Parliament? Is it something like a federal structure, or is it something different from that? And of course, it was in the perspective of the concept of nationalism that Tagore expounded. So because federalism goes well with that structure, but if it's something different, then that's what I was asking.
So, as I said, Poland is very happy of being part of European Union, and especially the society is very happy. Not one serious Polish politician has some doubts about being in the European Union. But there is a discussion about how to be in the European Union. I mean, and this is not only the case of Poland. I mean, in many countries there are discussions in which direction the European Union should go. Like in UK, they took the most radical decision that the society was not happy with the way that the European Union is going, and they just voted for leaving the European Union, which maybe they regret it now, but it will happen sooner or later. And the discussion about in which direction the European Union should go is crucial for the whole European Union. I mean, if it should go to be into the direction of being some super government over all the countries and have more competencies, or should it be like a platform of mutual exchange between the national states? And this is the core of the discussion. Other things I see just as technicalities.
Hello, my name is Renee. I want to thank you for your talk. As an educator, I'm very curious about the education system in Poland, and I wondered to what extent it would reflect Tagore's education system, or the one that he would have wanted, which regrettably I do not see reflected in the primary schools in West Bengal. Except for perhaps here at Visva-Bharati School. But other than there, the government primary schools in West Bengal, from research and observation, are sadly lacking some very basic fundamentals. And some of the principles that Tagore would have certainly wanted to see inculcated in children. And I also think, in response to the gentleman that asked about how do we transcend Tagore's values into today's society all over the world, regardless of boundaries, I believe we need to start with the children. And I think they're forgotten. You know, we give a lot of vigilance and time to university students, but we forget the children. And I believe that it's there that we will stop the future Auschwitzes, that we will stop the future wars. We no longer hear on any curriculum the values of equality, that each child is the same, and each child needs to be respected, that there should be kindness between children, that there should be reconciliation, an admission of wrong, the ability to say, I am sorry, will you forgive me? Until we inculcate those values in children, which I believe were very much Tagore's thing. He was cutting edge, he was incredibly progressive as an educator, but he believed in the evolution of a child as a thinker, not as a rote learner. And we've lost that. Somewhere that's all got lost in certainly in the government schools at the primary level in India. Where are you at with that in Poland, I ask? And is it something that you could offer to bring back to West Bengal?
I think, you know, in response to your question and the points which you have raised, I request the principal of Patwabon, the school in Visva-Bharati, Badrupa, if you enlighten us how we are doing, you know, to sustain or to retain some of the values which Tagore left for us.
As she has already mentioned, accepting the school at the two schools at Visva-Bharati, her observation is that Tagore's vision is not, unfortunately, that relevant or followed in that way in the other schools in West Bengal. But I was actually about to ask our speaker about how Tagore's vision on education is received and accepted in Poland, which dimensions are accepted there. But basically, the pillars on which Tagore's vision of education rests are joy, ability to express, self-governance, freedom. These are the basic facets of his philosophy of education. And we try to inculcate these values in our curriculum. That's how we proceed. Like as His Excellency visited Patwabon this morning, and we were discussing that fine arts has a very significant role in our curriculum, because that's one way of expressing the joy in our soul. So these are the different ways in which we try to follow this vision.
So, answering your question, actually, Poland inherited from the communist times the very strict to treat the students as the objects of learning. I mean, they should learn and they should not pose any questions. And especially I'm a historian, so you know, we call it like the teaching of history on the dates and battles, so and not the understanding of the process. So this is the moment that we started in 1989, but during these 3 decades that already passed, this system evaluated into a more flexible, and there are more and more schools that offer as a core value the thinking, to make the students think. One of these schools is this Maharaja Jamsar Singh Ji High School, which I graduated. This was one of the first schools, it's a private one, one of the first schools to introduce this kind of approach to students. You remember I asked you what is the relationship between the teacher and the student. Yes, so the Polish educational system is slowly evaluating into that these relationships are more partner-like and not just the teacher and the student. And but some part of this educational system is not, unfortunately, following these changes. So we have a boom of homeschooling in Poland. Yes, the homeschooling is allowed, and people just teach their children, or they gather in some small groups and they make the teachings, and the children just are obliged to pass some exams to be the official state-approved curriculum. So this system is evaluating to this what was invented by Rabindranath Tagore. And also in Europe, we have some countries that are further on this way, and this is especially Finland, which was now in the news that it offers the best education in the world, because it really generates or takes out from the children what they have the best, and the thinking, the creativity, and the understanding of what is going on in the world.
Thank you.
I think, we have quite a long session, so I think I don't want to burden Adam any longer. But before I make my comments, I would like to request Manos, রবীন্দ্রসঙ্গীত শুনতে ভালোবাসেন, আমাদের ভোট অফ থ্যাঙ্কস হবে না, রবীন্দ্রসঙ্গীত হবে, উনি তো রবীন্দ্রসঙ্গীত তৈরি করেন। Adam, I have got 2 Polish friends. One is you, certainly. Another is a friend of mine who is from Poland but working in the US, University of Virginia. His name is Bob Burakowski. And what a strange coincidence. I mean, in a number of ways, you resemble him. So I'm reminded of Bob constantly when Adam was talking.
Maybe we have a similar accent in English.
No, not even the way you talk, the way you explain, the way you absorb, kind of shocking questions. These are the things which Bob, epitomized. So when I was listening to you, I'm just reminded of Bob. He's a very dear friend of mine. He's also a Polish guy. And one thing I'm missing today, I don't know whether my friends are here. Our leftist friends should have been here today. Yes. Here is a person who talked about communism and who also explained the brutal character of the communist regime, which was smashed out by popular revolt. Relevance. We talked about Relevance as a solidarity. So I think this is an interesting kind of learning for us, And Adam, there's a very similar kind of experience. I spent many years in Germany. The same feeling I saw among most of the Germans, especially in the western part, is Germany is so poor, and West Germans, they pay a development tax, 1/3 of their salary. So, they are also unhappy that, to develop East Germany to the level of West Germany, they are contributing out of their own hard, out of their earning by hard work. So I think, somehow or the other, the communist regime was brutal, was inhuman, and was exploitative. Now this is one part of my answer. The second part is that, politically I am against the communist regime, just like you. But ideologically, when you talk of Marxism, when you talk of the Marxists' approach to history or even politics, probably, the methodologically, they provided a very powerful alternative to conceptualize things. So I think I make a distinction that politically I am against the communist regime. And Bengal is a good example. 34 years of communist regime, and now if you talk of communism, people will beat you. So the same thing. So I think we need to think in terms of what Mao forecasted at one point of time, that for the success of Marxism or communism, you need to have different kind of man. And I'm reminded of that, Edgar Snow's famous statement, which I already shared with some of your friends. When Cultural Revolution was taking place in China, Mao was asked by Edgar Snow, do you think China will be a different country after this Cultural Revolution? Mao made a very profound statement saying that Cultural Revolution is one, but to get rid of bourgeois vices, which is 2000 years old, which has been part of our blood, you need series of Cultural Revolution. So the failure of communist regime probably is just one of the facets of communism. So that's why this is how I see things, and I think we have similar kind of approach, being the student of political science. And the second point, Tagore. My experience here is about a year, and before that, I knew some parts of Tagore, some novels of Tagore, but I was not really interested in his political philosophy. Now I'm reading all his essays, because he is mainly known as a poet who is famous for his novels, for his songs, for his poetry. But here is a person who also wrote very interesting, thought-provoking essays. And there he talked about society, there he talked about human beings, there he talked about reality. And the moment I read all those things, I can see that he was the one who could see what was going to happen in 21st century. In many ways, he was a kind of an astrologer who really saw the future in his own eyes. But unfortunately, in Visva-Bharati, when we talk of Tagore, we tend to see Tagore in the context of late 19th and early 20th century. We hardly try to bring Tagore back to 21st century. So I think the ideas which we derive from Tagore need to be taken not literally, but in terms of its substance. Probably if we derive those ideas in terms of substance, probably we will be able to transform Visva-Bharati and transform the vicinity and transform the world accordingly. So I think I am in favor of reviving some of the ideas of Tagore which are relevant contextually. As to history, I'm sure you will agree with that. That Tagore in his period, in his context, was most powerful. But Tagore in today's context, how to interpret them? You can't interpret Tagore as he was in the late 19th, early 20th century. So you have to rethink, you have to reinvent some of his ideas in today's context. But it's just not saying that I'm a Tagorean or I'm Rabindranath simply because I sing Rabindranath. that makes no sense. Or I am Rabindranath simply because I wear dhoti kurta. I think to be a Rabindranath, to be a Tagorean, you need to imbibe the values, the ideas, the spirit in which he articulated those values, and try to execute or translate them into practice by your deeds, which is missing. So I think probably we are passing through a transition. We are passing through a transition, and I am sure, given the magnificent path-breaking contribution of Rabindranath Tagore, of which we are the inheritors, will be able to contribute immensely to the global well-being. The third point, which I think we need to talk about it simply because we both of us are students of political science and history. The point which was mentioned by my colleague already, somehow or the other, when you think of Poland, we do not see Poland as independent of Warsaw Pact countries. Poland is being associated with Warsaw Pact countries. So, this is a Cold War kind of study. And when we are students, we are being raised as students, we always identified Poland as part of the Warsaw Pact countries. But after having studied Poland very briefly though, and after having listened to you, today I think that Poland represents a very powerful culture, and Poland also gives us good human beings, and one of them happens to be a friend of mine, Adam. Right? With these words, I thank you very much, and as I said, this is an extension of your family. Whenever you feel like coming, you are welcome. So before we finish, I ask them to sing a song for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just very short comment. First on communism. Maybe I just quote a joke from communist times, that capitalism is exploitation of a man by the man, and communism is just the opposite. So, yeah. And about Poland, Poland allied with the communist regime in Moscow is something very artificial. It was for a very short time in our more than 1,000 years history, and we are a free country now. And our values, all of our culture is Western oriented.
So now Rabindranath for you.
Oh, আমাদের শান্তি নিকেতন, যেথায় বলি ধরে সেজে যায় না কবু দূরে, ওদের মনের মাঝে প্রেমের সে তার বাধা যে তার সুরে, আমরা যেথায় বলি ধরে সেজে যায় না কবু দূরে, ওদের মনের মাঝে প্রেমের সে তার বাধা যে তার সুরে। প্রাণের সঙ্গে প্রাণের সেজে মিলিয়েছে এক তালে, মোদের প্রাণের সঙ্গে প্রাণের সেজে মিলিয়েছে এক তালে, মোদের ভাইয়ের সঙ্গে ভাইকে সেজে করেছে এক মন আমাদের শান্তি নিকেতন।